Hello and welcome to another edition of Nucleus Investment Insights. Today we're back talking Trump again. It's pretty hard to avoid it at the moment. It would be nice to riff on some other topics, but obviously dominating investment views and thoughts. And so we thought we'd probably what we want to do is talk a lot about what Trump means for Australia in particular, but we'll also jump into some of the other stuff that's been going on during the week. Just a quick reminder as well, everything you hear today is general advice, not personal. If you do want personal advice, you can book in with a meeting and have a chat to us. Also a reminder just to hit the like and subscribe buttons. And with no further ado, I'll bring through Dave as well. Hi, Dave. How you going?
Good, thanks, Damo. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. So, and again, I guess apologies for not being on live yesterday. We were usually on 12:30 on Thursdays. We had to shift it for to today for a change. So, Trump for Australia. I guess we sort of started kicking this around, Dave, because there's been a bit of thoughts around Australia and what it means. I think somebody came out with talking about whether this can delay interest rate rises for Australia as well as the US, and that sort of struck us as not being right. So maybe that's probably the best place to start for this one. Is Trump's obviously got a lot of policies all based around America first, and he's just he's been going through appointing his cabinet, or his preferred cabinet. I guess they still need to be approved, and in his first round in particular, there was a lot of anti-China people who he's looking to appoint. So I guess I wanted to sort of put that forward as a starting point, saying, with an anti-China bias and America first bias, it doesn't sort of necessarily it sort of seems to say that's bad for Australia rather than being good.
Well, in these things, people tend to see economics as a lake rather than a river, which it isn't. It's a river, not a lake. And so you open one door, close another, close one door, open another. And so it's more a case of winners and losers than it is just losing. So yeah, they look very serious about their tariff agenda from the appointments. And moreover, there's a leak that they may try and get the tariffs through Congress rather than as presidential through presidential decree. And the upside, well, the implication of that is that it would essentially become law and make it very much more difficult to reverse for a future president who couldn't just do a reverse degree. It also slightly changes the calculation of the tariff revenue and enables it to be more directly kind of apportioned to tax cuts.
Well, but also it's not just for future presidents, but also for Trump. So Trump's obviously got a tendency to change his mind on things, and certainly negotiate through the media. Yeah. And that was a lot of what he was doing last time around. Was we're just going to keep increasing this every month until you guys finally capitulate. But if he does that and then
stock market starts to fall,
that's right, and it's in law, and then you got to push it back through there, and and questions about how long that takes, and if you hit the midterms, and maybe he doesn't have the same power, and all that.
So yes, in short, I think his tariff agenda will be as promised. I think those expecting that was rhetorical are wrong. And so that's the first thing for us to discuss. What does that do to Australia? Well, it very much also depends on how the rest of the world responds. But the basic implication is let's assume they get it through Congress, probably takes a bit longer, becomes law, a lot more tax cut revenues available. And so, right there, you've got an incredibly bullish scenario for the US dollar. And so the first thing to say for Australia is that kind of scenario would be a very weak Australian dollar. Now, first up, because the US dollar would be so strong. Second, those tariffs would be largest and most severe on China, which I think, some of the estimates around 2% of GDP impact are probably around right, given it's become so externally dependent again. And so that's quite a nasty blow to growth. They would counter that with a lower yuan, which we're already seeing, lower interest rates, which we're already seeing. But those things actually, they should have done those things 2 years ago, fighting their property bust. So they're probably not bad outcomes for the world.
But having said that, though, they're going to be 2 steps backwards if they did it now. They keep the demand the same, and
that's right.
Yeah, but
it's too late.
They'll have that's right. They'll have other negatives at that
Yes.
point. They need to do more. Yes,
they will, exactly right, and they will do fiscal and things, which will have to be some kind of domestic demand. I think it will probably be, the things that we've grown used to, more money channeled towards new economy industries, something for the consumer, maybe more to try and stabilize property, etc. I still don't expect a big bang thrown at construction infrastructure. I don't think they'll be able to do much for property. It's still an absolute black hole, and so it will not be easy to offset, I guess is the point. But they'll give it a crack. Now that model is those who are affected by the tariffs will respond with monetary easing, some fiscal easing, and a currency war.
Yeah, there is a bullish. There's the bullish angle, which is we don't think is right, but the bullish angle is, hey, things will be so bad they'll have to reignite the property.
Yes, that's right, and there will be fiscal, and look, there will be a rebound, right? But it'll be 12, 18 months out, unless they go heavy fiscal, which I don't think that most of these affected economies will, because they're inhibited. China, it just doesn't fit China's DNA to go heavy domestic demand stimulus, fiscal stimulus. It's not in their makeup in terms of consumption and stuff. So
they try everything else first, and then
look, even in the end, I don't think they're going to get there. I just don't think they want to boost. They don't want to decentralize. They want to centralize. It's against everything they stand for. They're all about centralization and power. And fiscal stimulus to households is the opposite.
And sorry, that's an important distinction. Is Xi is all about decentralization. Sorry, centralization of power. Yes. The prior, part of a lot of China's prior success was the fact they were decentralizing.
Yes.
And a lot of the problems are coming because they're now trying to pull it all back again.
But that's Xi's. That's Xi Jinping thought. That's the CCP.
That's right. It's his North Star. So he's
that's right. And then you look at Europe, who would be probably the second worst hit. Well, you can look at a lot of emerging markets that are going to get smashed. Places like Vietnam, Mexico, whatever, they're all going to get clubbed, even with smaller tariffs. But the next big economy, continental economy, will be Europe. The tariffs there will be smaller, so obviously less of a blow to growth, but just as troubled in terms of trying to get a decent fiscal response. So fragmented, and the fragmentation is going to get worse because both China and the US are deliberately and accidentally fragmenting Europe through various populists, there that are rising. So it'll be difficult for them to get a strong fiscal response. So the European Central Bank is likely to be easier again, and the euro weak. And so again, you get more strong US dollar. And we're seeing this in markets already. From day one, we basically said this was the likely outcome, and markets have agreed with that. And the US dollar's going absolutely bananas at the moment, massively overbought. And the Australian dollar through the floor. So at a certain point, that's going to get far enough, and we may be close to that in short-term technical terms now. But I don't think we're anywhere near pricing these kind of outcomes yet. Like if this is what we get, the Australian dollar is going to go much lower than it is now, and the US dollar much higher. Another reason for that is that the tariffs, as I intimated, they're going to land very heavily on, all the Asian exporters, and that's where all the steel demand is, right? So you are going to see a pretty serious hit to steel consumption initially. And of course, there'll be a growth pickup in the US, but it'll be more domestically sourced for supply. And so you get a hit to steel consumption and therefore, some kind of steel adjustment. But of course, it depends very much on what the mix of stimulatory responses are, in return. But I don't think they'll be. My best guess is they won't be enough to offset fully the blow from tariffs. I think they will in time, but not immediately, because more of it will be monetary than fiscal, is my basic guess, and more of it will be forex than fiscal. And those forces take time to actually lift economic activity than fiscal, which is more direct and immediate. So that's the other blow that comes to Australia. So when somebody tells me, Trump tariffs driving up inflation, Australian inflation rate cuts are off, rate hikes maybe, I'm just like, no. Like the only thing that would do that is if we put counter tariffs on. And
but it's also the part that if China's got tariffs on via the US, it's going to be trying to export to other countries. And if it's lowering the yuan, then Australia,
and not just China, like all the North Asian exporters will be in a currency war, and they will be cut off in some measure from US demand, which their entire industrial base is geared to. So, they're going to be dumping goods worldwide.
Yeah, that's right. So unless Australia goes and puts tariffs on all those same countries, which we're going to be seeing deflation coming through from
we're going to see goods deflation, massive goods deflation. Terms of trade hit, at least initially, I would think, through the bulk commodities. I also think oil is likely to fall next year because, it'll be a bit of a blow to global growth. OPEC is just losing market share hand over fist. Non-OPEC oil is booming. If you get peace in Russia as well, you could see the return of more Russian barrels. Oil's in trouble, and under Trump, and so that does mitigate some of the US dollar upside and things. But basically, that all of these things for outside of the US are really disinflationary, and so if you've got an Aussie mortgage, you should probably be cheering Trump on. Now, if you're a miner, it's probably not going to be so good. And this is what I mean by winners and losers. If you're
a Gina Rinehart at the celebratory party at Mar-a-Lago, it may not have actually been the greatest day ever.
No, it probably isn't.
Maybe from a political point of view for her, but maybe not from a financial point of view.
Yes. Yeah, but Australia has been in nearly 3 years of per capita recession. I mean, we need some relief for households. So I think that's great. Bring on some rate cuts. All in all, I think for households, it's cheaper goods, lower inflation, and more rate cuts. And I used to work with a US hedge fund manager who was used to looking at housing markets through the prism of US mortgage pricing, which comes from their 30-year bond, right? And so they're all fixed rate mortgages. And he said, what? You don't have fixed rate mortgages. You've got floating rate mortgages. Yeah. He said, so everyone just prays for a recession. Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Because, low interest rates drive the Australian economy. So I think lower interest rates in 2025 and 2026. I think also if they sustain immigration, I think.
So who sustains immigration? So Australia or US?
Australia. If Australia sustains immigration, which it will.
Well, yeah, but this is the next point though, isn't it? In that, because I wanted to get there is, Trump's been talking about saying, you're going to slam the door shut on illegal immigration and deport people, but he's going to then open the door, and particularly for education. And my immediate thought is, there'd be a lot of people in whatever, India, China, whatever countries that are coming to Australia, who if they're given the choice between Australia or the US, would probably choose the US.
Well, like everybody. I mean, everybody would. Like,
maybe not everyone, but most of them.
Well, 99%. So I mean,
well,
I think the vast majority. Yeah. So yes, I mean, and that's again.
So does that take it out of Australia's hands, though?
Well, it is. I mean, that becomes a market share battle then. And I think, I mean, there's a whole bunch of hilarious things that could happen there. But one of them is certainly that Australia will get some relief from its excessive international student immigration. So rents could fall as well, which again comes back to lower interest rates.
But the irony here is, we've been speaking about this for a while, is that Australia's for some of Australia's best industrial policy over the last few years didn't come from the Australian government. It came from the US putting on all these Inflation Reduction Act and everything, and actually just including some Australian companies in there, which actually was some of the best industrial policy. And here's our immigration and
often our best external property policies come from China.
Exactly. Yeah, China's banning our stuff. And making us,
forcing us to diversify.
Exactly.
And when we had the runaway foreign investor housing boom in 2014 to 18, which was like creating an incredible bubble. Like, we did nothing, but then China cut off the capital flow.
Yeah.
And gave a generation of Australians a slim chance of getting a house.
Yeah. And here we go with Trump. So basically, bringing our interest rates down for us. Giving us some deflation from China via all these tariffs he's sticking on, and trying to fix the immigration problem that we've got by sucking the students to the US rather than Australia.
But what's also funny for the US as a brief aside is when, if he does give everybody a green card coming out of US education, which he probably will have to if he's going to do the big roundup.
Yeah. Or at least some sort of temporary green card that you can come here and you roll out of uni, we'll give you 4 or 5 years worth of
work rights in one form or another. He's immediately going to trigger all the problems that Australia have had.
Not immediately. It's going to take a while because
it'll take a few years.
Yeah, it's in the short term.
Just through bogus colleges out of India and visa industry, Look, Australians are good scammers. They're enterprising, but they can't compete with American grifters, right? So you're going to see an unbelievable kind of immigration scam fest.
But here's the part for me for that is that's not going to be immediate. That's going to be
could be a time for midterms or
well, I guess what I'm saying is you get rid of a lot of illegal immigrants and you take out this workforce that's there, the cheap workforce, but then you replace it with the all these people on student visas who then get exploited by your 7-Elevens and all the other people that are around to try and maybe they'll be lower down, but they'll be exploited to replace a lot of that.
Yeah.
And the time though when they actually get out, when they actually hit the workforce and start affecting, say, IT salaries or whatever it is, other sort of bottom end, or entry level jobs, isn't for like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And so that's no longer Trump's problem. That's somebody else's problem. So you sort of got this. It's a bit like all the spending stuff is like he's going to run up the credit card bill, but that's somebody else's
problem. But but there will be problems, I guess. The type of problems that would generally upset, like an AR wielding Trumpist. But anyway, so where were we? So nearly everything I see is negative for Australian. Positive for lower Australian interest rates coming out of the Trump agenda.
Yeah.
Except the falling dollar. Okay, so the dollar's getting belted and stuff, but you know, it's going to have to fall an awful long way to overhaul the kind of dumping that I would expect if China gets a 60% tariff. So
yeah, well, and it's a race though between. So we're all falling against the US dollar.
we are.
It's a relativity between Australia and China.
Absolutely. No, you're quite right.
And they're probably going to get hit harder than we are.
Yes. No, quite right.
Yeah.
And we've got a free float, whereas they don't. So, actually, that would be a negative.
That would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes. So, not concerned about interest rates. I think it's more likely to provide some relief. What else have we got on our list, Damo, for Trump fallout? I do have to get to Kevin Rudd at some point as well.
Yeah, let's go. Well, I mean, appointments and everything like that. But
perhaps Geopolitics is a better title for this section than Kevin Rudd.
well, especially since I believe in the past, David, you've written some things about Kevin Rudd and had and offered retractions on the same.
I am Kevin Rudd's legal team. Yes. So
you're just going to be a little
very nice people, and I don't want to upset them.
Yes,
but the geopolitics of Trump. Gosh, I mean, crikey, where to start? I mean, we've mentioned Ukraine, very bad. Mixed again for Europe. The end of if Trump can settle the Ukraine war, and there are reasons to think he might. He has a lot of leverage with Ukraine, obviously. With supplying a lot of their arms, there's no immediate way to backfill that if he threatens to pull out. Europe would struggle mightily to do so. That's the one area, mind you, that is the one area of possible fiscal upside where most of Europe will agree is on arms spending.
Well, and actually, I would put that down as something that's going to happen regardless of whatever Trump does in the Ukraine now.
Yes.
Is that I think if you had a Democratic president, they would sort of go, okay, look, we can still keep spending whatever we're spending, and we can rely on the US to help us if anything goes wrong. Whereas regardless of what happens here, countries in Europe are just going to have to spend more.
And defense spending is going to have to rise. Yes.
Yeah.
That is a certainty. Probably a certainty everywhere. That one. There's probably not a lot more to say on. NATO be pressured, more spending. These institutions are pretty solid. I don't think Trump's going to pull them apart.
Yeah.
Just make them transactional.
Well, but to get to your Rudd point, and maybe I can do some talking on this, and you can tell me where I'm wrong rather than. Is that it would appear to me that Australia actually did pretty in terms of relative sense of so we're Trump's obviously going for America first. I think in his last term he had a lot of America first within that. But if you sort of ranked the countries that did everyone's going to do badly out of it, but the ones that do the least badly, Australia was pretty high on the list of countries doing the least badly. And the relationship, while there might be strains and all that sort of stuff, was it certainly didn't suffer as much as many other countries. And if you're going to draw it down to saying, okay, well, Kevin Rudd might have some issues in terms of that part because what he said, there are certainly people in the Trump sphere of influence who have managed to keep their jobs and get promotions despite saying bad things about him. But they usually did a complete 180 and a complete obsequious, everything he says is right and is the greatest thing ever. And is Rudd prepared to do that? I doubt it. Would be my guess. And so that sort of means, well, from a political point of view, yes, you need somebody different for Australia in that position.
Yeah.
The second part then is last time it was a Conservative government. This time it's a not a conservative government, and so it might not hold up as well as it did last time, given the political issues that I think Albanese's base would not support him being completely obsequious to a US president, whereas Dutton's base might not care.
Well, the entire environment was different too. I mean, at least in the second half of the Trump administration last time, Australia was, kind of at war with China.
Mm.
And we made ourselves the tip of the spear in terms of pushing back against Chinese encroachments into liberal
whether intentionally or not. Yes.
Well, maybe it was the blundering of Scott Morrison. I didn't really care, as long as it was happening.
That's right.
And we really were the tip of the spear, and the Conservative government was it really drove the agenda into the OECD and the G20, and we were appearing as special guests in all sorts of liberal forums all over the world, saying, "Hey, look at these 14 conditions to end democracy. Maybe you should be preparing for a different China than you thought." And so that was an environment that fitted with America First perfectly. But since then, the Labor government's done a total about face. It's still got AUKUS, but it's gone entirely backwards in terms of trying to grow trade with China. You've got former prime ministers, declaring eternal personal allegiance to Beijing, Labor prime ministers. It wasn't just Kevin Rudd. You had a lot of Labor politicians put the boot right into Trump. Probably led by Rudd, but there have been many others, and so the point that the context is much more troubled in terms of the Australia-US relationship. So you want to have somebody who's able to develop a personal relationship and assuage those fears and smooth those bumps and what have you, and the guy that was most insulting is just not the dude to have there. And you would say that in any, no matter who was in power, but we all know Trump is a hands-on personal president with, a fair amount of self-regard, we'll call it. Okay, we'll be diplomatic, and you just don't want, a sworn enemy dealing with him. It's not in the national interest. I'm saying Trump, Rudd's a sworn enemy. Of course, he's not a sworn enemy, but somebody who's, made some very, very disparaging comments. And so, yes, Trump has forgiven some, but I would argue, the appointment of Matt Gaetz is rather scary for those that he doesn't forgive.
Yeah. So let's talk about the appointment. So actually, is there anything else on the Australian side before? Because I do want to talk about the appointments and what they might mean more broadly, rather than specifically for Australia. But because I think there's some interesting things to watch.
Before we do that, we should just finish geopolitics to the big fear, China and Taiwan.
Yes.
Does this go there? I don't know, but if you are really wanting to do it, well, you probably want to do it under Trump, and he's more likely to trade stuff away to let Beijing get away with it than other presidents, certainly Democratic presidents. Does that increase the likelihood? Well, it doesn't diminish it. And the Chinese economy, if it's cut off from American demand, it's going to hurt. And if Beijing elects to turn its people into soldiers rather than consumers, then it's not inconceivable that we end up in that horrible outcome before the end of this term. I don't know, that's certainly not a prediction. It's a fear.
Yeah. Well, and it's really just saying whatever the proportionate chance, we thought it was quite low prior, we think it's significantly higher under Trump. Yeah, and whether that means you've gone from a less than a 1% chance to greater than 1% chance, but anyway, we don't have good percentages on it, but there's some. It's increasing.
I don't think anyone can put a number on it. It's
no,
just, you're operating from instinct on that one, and it's just a little bit more dangerous than it was.
Yep. The other one to note in terms of company taxes, just for Australian investors. So just reminding anyone that if you are investing in Australia and the Aussie dollar is falling, that's a good thing for your portfolio. Is that you bought assets in US dollars and the Aussie dollar is falling, so those assets in Aussie dollar terms are going up. Also, companies internationally, the tax rates are coming down. So, they're highly likely to come down. So, sort of 10%-ish in terms of that. And actually, at the margin, that does suggest companies might be more likely to pay dividends rather than doing buybacks. Now, it's still more tax attractive in the US for companies there to do buybacks rather than dividends. But the lower the tax rate goes, the less that is. And so, there's sort of that sort of sitting there as well in the background. Is that there's So that was those. Should we talk appointments?
Yeah.
So look, this. I guess the question for me. So it's probably safe to say the first round of appointments came out. Lots of China hawks on that, but by and large, they're looked upon as sort of better than feared. Probably say that. And then we've seen this latest round come out, and there's been a few more, quite eye-opening suggestions, and it's an interesting question about. I sort of look upon this as a few different ways. One is this Trump's attempt? Say let's use Matt Gaetz as a good example. Is this his Trump to just throw out a wild name to have everyone froth and newspaper headlines and complain and talk back talk back, all those things, complaints about it.
Art of the deal.
Exactly, and then and that'll slip through 4 other appointments that might have actually been looked upon the same way, but now it's sort of like, well, at least they're not Gates,
Yeah.
And then with the view that most of the Republicans hate him anyway, and so he might, if it does go to the Senate, it's highly likely he gets kicked back anyway. And so you've attracted all the attention, you've slipped through all these other ones who now with less due diligence or less concern over them, and then you sort of get what you want. And he has actually put 2. He's sort of second in charge, and the Solicitor General are both from his existing legal team, but they're actually pretty well thought of, both of them. Like one of them was the guy arguing who won the sort of Supreme Court arguments, and the other one used to was a senior district attorney, and so they're genuine, serious people. But it's sort of this microcosm about it. I think it's really going to tell us what's going on in terms of this, because that's one reading of it is, he's got these 2 quite serious people who, yes, are going to be running things, and he's put up this crazy first person, and he'll get knocked back anyway by the Senate, and then we'll put someone more reasonable, and off you go. Is one way to look at it. The other one is, well, this should tell us, though, there is a way where he can just bypass the Senate, and they've been speaking about using it, and where basically all he needs is a recess, and then he can put him in for 2 years, and basically just need to engineer a recess and then use sort of the emergency decrees. Now, that's not what these are they're intended for, but it is potential that it'll give you a pretty good idea about the norms and the rules, and whether he's going to be playing the game of I'm just going to appoint whoever I want, and I'm going to not appoint whoever, right? I'm actually just going to run roughshod over all the laws and see if they can keep up. Because if he does it through that recess, through the recess, and gets Gates in there, and then gets Gates chasing all his political enemies, that's a pretty bad sign for everything, for the rule of law, I guess, within the US, and what's going to be seen from that. But the flip side is, maybe it's just grandstanding. I don't know. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, it's probably all those things. The one
maybe he doesn't know which one it is yet.
No. And the only point I would probably make is, I do expect him to get his revenge on the deep state, as it were, and the various departments that tried to, get him in prison or charged with various things, as well as his supporters. I would expect, a pretty vehement push, and you could see Matt Gaetz as part of that. But more importantly, if it's not Matt Gaetz, I do think you'll see it anyway. I don't, the one thing you never do with a narcissist is humiliate them in public. This is another reason why I think Kevin Rudd needs to come home, because they don't forgive. They don't forgive. A narcissist that's been humiliated in public will never forgive and will exact revenge. So, if it's not Matt Gaetz, it will be somebody else, and I would expect him to go pretty hard on the areas that he was really punished after the Jan 6 stuff. I think Washington is in for a pretty rugged time.
Yeah, and the question there, I guess, comes back to saying, well, will he find competent people? Because I think there was certainly, he struggled in that first round of trying to push stuff through that he wanted to push through, but the people he had trying to do it weren't competent enough to get it in the right format to then. And so it seems like they've had a better go at it this time, and certainly, like, he's second in charge, and the two others he's appointing are competent. They're certainly, and the question is, will they push through whatever? And it's hard to say that they're not thought of as those types of people. Whereas obviously Matt Gaetz is thought of as a person who will just do whatever.
There's also the prospect of turnover, like as we saw in round one, where the competent people may be gone in 3 months because they're like, Jesus, I didn't sign up for this, or the crazies might be gone because they can't get it done.
Well, that's right. And I guess what I'm wondering from that perspective is there's a certain limit. Like, the legal system is very good at slowing things down, as Trump himself showed.
Yes.
And so he might have an agenda of chasing a bunch of people, but what he might find is that, yes, he can get the top 10 names on his list, but actually getting much below that might be hard, because then most of his resources are all tied up still chasing that top 10, and they're just stymieing and delaying and pushing.
And it's actually an argument you can apply to his whole agenda. Like, there are checks and balances still on what they're proposing. So the appointment of Gaetz is the key one to watch, though. And because the other thing that'll show as well is, if he does get through the Republicans, it'll show how much the Senate's going to be a pushover. Because if they can get Matt Gaetz through, which by all accounts most of them hate, and he's had all these personal problems with a whole bunch of them, if Trump can make all these make the Senate push him through, and he seems unqualified, and he's been under allegations himself of child underage sex stuff, and like there's all these problems with the candidacy. If he can get somebody like that through, then he'll be able to get anything he wants through the Senate. Is one sign. And the second one is, well, if he bypasses the Senate completely and Republicans let him get away with that, then to put this through, then that's a sign as well about how much they're going to be allowed to roll over. And arguably, if they were, I would think there'd be senators out there who would be more willing to let him do it as a recess, and then just throw their hands up and go, well, I would have knocked Matt Gaetz back, but I never got the chance because he went around me. They'd be more willing to let him get away with that than what they would sort of push through. Yeah. Anyway, that's one part. Some of the other ones, just in terms of, I guess the military side of it, because we spoke about the Ukraine. So the fact he's sort of put basically somebody up for, I don't know, 100% sure how to pronounce his name, Hegseth.
in charge of defence is basically says, well, here's somebody who doesn't seem to have particularly a particular worldview, except for the military's too woke, and it's a war on woke, and so that's sort of his job. He'll be prosecuting that and getting rid of generals that Trump doesn't like or whatever. It does seem as if that sort of that is leaning towards, rather than bring in, like, I think last time they sort of brought in China Hawks or whatever it is, whereas this one really seems to be like, I just want somebody who he's going to fight his battle up against woke. Maybe that's what they're going to spend the whole time doing, or maybe he's brought that type of person in so that person can fight the battle against woke, and meanwhile Trump can do whatever he wants on the.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very domestic appointment, isn't it?
Yes.
So it mitigates against, I mean, I guess it reaffirms, sensibly or not, the idea that America will be strategically turning inwards.
Yeah. And then, the RFK Jr., this is if you want to treat it as setting an anti-vaxxer in charge of the health department, if you want to be, I guess, glass half full on this, is like, well, maybe he'll just turn the vax stuff, which is obviously not a good thing from my view, turn them from compulsory into voluntary. Maybe that's all he'll do. And on the flip side, he's actually got a lot of stuff he wants to do in terms of, health. And he used to be an environmental lawyer. Like, he spent his time prosecuting a lot of these environmental laws. He actually went up against Trump a few times, to stop Trump from overdeveloping. And so, he says he wants to do all these great things about food and, unhealthy food and all these things, and actually break some of the nexus between companies who donate the money to the department to then, regulate them, and break some of that risk between the regulation and the companies. Now, if that's true, that's a great thing for it, but it could also just be the art of the deal as well, and this is just a way for Trump to extract bigger donations from these companies to his own cause. So, I think there's it's a I think that'll be another key area to watch in terms of the that could genuinely really hit the healthcare sector in terms of their profits, or maybe it's just a plea for a bribe. So so that's probably the big one that they're the big ones that I sort of noted from the announcements, and I guess RFK Jr. as well is interesting insofar as, look, is that just another one that's tossing a guy who's obviously thought of as quite weird out there to distract attention from some of the others.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Who knows?
Right. Anything else in the Trump world that we need to kick around?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think of investment implications.
There's certainly stock-specific stuff that we're spending a lot of time doing, and
Australia specifically. I mean, bonds are an interesting question because we've seen since Trump was elected, the long end of the Aussie bond curve follows the US, so we've seen rising yields in long bonds. But we've also seen them at the short end, which I just think is mispricing.
Yeah. But just to keep in mind for investors there, if you're not trying to make money from movements at the short end, you've got to use leverage. Like, there's just not much to make. Like, you can make a
huge leverage.
Yeah, that's right. If you want to, your bets on whether there'll be a rate cut next week or whether it be in 2 months' time or 3 months' time, whatever. Yeah. Those short-term ones, you're making like 1% here and 0.5% there, and the people the hedge funds that trade that just leverage the crap out of them and make these huge. As an individual investor, investing in bonds, the longer term bonds can make a meaningful difference, but the shorter term stuff really just doesn't move the needle.
So I mean, I guess the point is, I think I actually think that the cash rate will fall in Australia. So I think we're going to see a steepening curve here, basically. So that gives you a mix of bond plays. Stocks here, I mean, I'm still avoiding miners. I'm kind of waiting to see, for the tariffs to drop, or at least I guess the intention of them, and see what China does in response to set up a possible shorting opportunity in the miners. So I'm not, but we're underweight miners and will remain so, just on the various pressures that we see there. At the moment, kind of late cycle cyclicals are all flying. So the banks, like CBA is now at 26 times, on its way to 50, perhaps. I don't know. But that looks really weird if we'd end up being right and interest rates fall a lot and more than expected, then the banks are going to run into net interest margin problems, headwinds, and so it may be a good time to be looking at lightening up on banks that are almost preposterously overvalued. Dare I say bubble territory. In general, falling Aussie dollar is your friend in the stock market. So, you'd be looking at US dollar earners other than, non-mining, those kinds of things, because I actually think that the dollar is a shot at getting back into the 50s over 2025. Those are the obvious things that kind of come to mind. And, there are many kind of strategies and other plays, in and around those general trends.
Good point from Tycoon. He's mentioning about Dogecoin, but it's probably worth mentioning that. But it is well worth talking about what Elon's plans are and what the issues are with that, because I think there's some. I just want to talk some of the big picture numbers so you can sort of put it in perspective. But I'll leave Dogecoin with you.
Well, I think the only thing to observe about Dogecoin is what is it? The Department of Government Efficiency? Is that what it is? Yeah. For the Department of Government Efficiency to cause a spike in Dogecoin tells you everything about how wacko markets are.
And sorry, just for anyone who hasn't been watching it, is basically the acronym of Department of Government Efficiency is the same as the DOGE is the same as Dogecoin, and so Dogecoin went up 4 times, was it?
No, it wasn't that much. But
it was just,
but it's just insane. I mean, and that is something that's good and bad about Trump, is you'll get volatility. So, but you can't really plan for it because it's kooky dude. So who knows?
Let's lean away from when it happens. But let's talk. I mean, it's sort of the I think I can't remember whether Chaser or the Shovel was noting the irony that you're trying to get efficiency, so you've appointed 2 heads.
Well, just to be serious for 1 second, I should say, everyone's gone crazy over crypto because Trump has flipped and been groomed by the crypto bros.
Yeah,
I don't think it's bullshit.
Not groomed, bribed.
Well,
he's got the appropriate bribe. He's got involved, and so now it's financially in his interest.
So I don't, but I'm still not bullish crypto. I mean, I don't think crypto is even an asset. But push that aside, and at this stage of the life cycle of crypto, the only rationale it has for buying it, really, unless you're a criminal, is a store of value, a digital gold, and the Trump administration is just not good for gold, like either analog or digital, because it's unless you believe he's going to blow out the US deficit so far that you must own gold, and I just don't think we're there yet, if we ever will be, and so you're left with an incredibly strong US dollar, rising real interest rates, and a very hostile environment for gold and digital gold, if that's what it is. So I think it's sell crypto, don't buy crypto.
Yeah. On the whole Department of Government Efficiency, it probably isn't going to be a department. It's probably just going to be a committee, which then means it's got a grandiose name, but it's probably just going to be like an external advice committee. Some of their things about cutting 50% of the workforce and all these things like that. I think my initial thought was like, is that enough to cause a recession? Like if you got rid of half the government workforce, that's probably enough to cause a recession in most countries and chase it all down. But
certainly Australia.
Certainly Australia. Yeah, well, that's right. We've been speaking about how all the growth in Australia has been coming from effectively governments, whether either education or healthcare,
with the emphasis on all.
Yes, more than all.
More than all.
Yeah, that's right. The rest of the private sector is going backwards, and it's actually only the government sector that's been holding everything up. So, so just to put that in context, though, is that when you dig into what's going on, it's not as well. It's still unclear, but the dangers. It looks more like a shuffling of the deck chairs rather than some real change. So it is entirely possible that Elon comes in and like he did with Twitter, just fire a bunch of people and then things stop working and then you see how you go and you see if you can put it all back together again. I do think that's going to be a much tougher in a government department in that you've got people there who, when you ask them to sleep under their desk, are not going to be.
What happened to the Twitter workforce?
What's that, sorry?
What happened to the Twitter workforce as he put it back together? Did it rise?
I'm not sure. I didn't follow it up to that. But it is worth noting that it's about 2 million out of 20 million in total. Like so we're talking about the federal, not the state and the local. Most government employees are state or local, and some of the things they're talking about doing, let's say education, they're like, we're going to abolish the Department of Education. Well, that's the headline. But the reality is they're actually looking to put it back to the states. And so maybe that actually ends up hiring more people because you go, yes, I've got this centralized group of 100,000 people doing it and their efficiencies and all that type of stuff. And now we're pushing it back out to all the states. And suddenly, instead of being 100,000, now you've got 200,000 because it's 10,000 in all these different states. And so, so I guess what I'm saying is it might not be as it might just be a bit of accounting sleight of hand. It's like, look at all this money we've saved at the federal government level, and the net effect is actually you just wasted all the money. As a total government, you've actually spending more money than what you started with. The other one is the biggest employer in that federal government is the Veterans Affairs, and so I don't know. It seems like that seems like a if you're a populist, that seems like a dangerous place to be cutting masses of people out, and you have veterans not getting their checks and things like that. Don't know if that's going to care, but you would think that would be one area where where Trump would be probably not going to be cutting. So anyway, so there's obviously some stuff going on. You could see some interruption in government services, but I do think there's going to be I guess I'm watching for sleight of hand savings rather than real savings, and also trying to work out, and then it's another interesting case another key case as to seeing, well, how much are they willing to damage, the fabric of the US government, and some of it's probably going to be good. Like there's a number of departments where, a real genuine shakeup would be good, but that'll be the part where it would be seeing how much of the pushback actually happens once you start trying to do these things and real jobs get lost and phones start ringing off their hooks to local MPs. That's where they reversed in the past. Maybe he'll get past that. Maybe he won't.
So a quick update on Elon and employer headcount. There were 7,500-ish employees at Twitter when he bought it. He sacked 80%. And then it rebounded from 1,500 to 2,800 today.
Right.
So it's still more than half what it was.
Yeah.
Back then. Not that that's overly relevant. just interesting.
Yeah, well, and you know, from as an outsider looking in, you know, a website that takes in what used to be 140 characters or 280 characters and then publishes it to the world doesn't seem like it would need 7,500 employees, but yeah.
Well, I guess a lot of them were doing censorship.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah.
But
anyway,
so I would just close by saying, whatever happens, whatever comes Australia's way, at least economically, if we don't get to some of the more dire geopolitical outcomes, because we've been so suppressed for so long since the arrival of the Labor government, or at least domestic demand has, and the market economy, domestic demand, there's actually quite a coiled spring there if there is a problem. And if the RBA would have to move aggressively, I think that Australian domestic demand would take off. If they slashed interest rates and had to. There's heaps of dry powder there. So I'm not actually concerned about particularly negative outcomes for the Australian economy. I think, if anything, they're likely to be better for most Australians than not.
But companies, it's a question of the companies that are going to benefit may not be the same companies that benefited over the last few years.
Absolutely. And CBA 26 times isn't really factoring that outcome in.
No. That's right. Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks for that, Dave. We'll leave the podcast there. Just a reminder for everyone, we're on every Thursday usually at 12:30. Tune in, drop in any questions you want to ask. You can get us on all the usual podcast platforms, plus on YouTube Live. And we look forward to seeing everyone next week. Thanks.
Thanks. Good to see you.